Hello, Waterford Wesleyan Church Online. My name is Pastor Matt. I'm the assistant pastor here at Waterford Wesleyan Church. And guess what? Today we're going to hear from Pastor Paul after a couple weeks of being down in the warm, and he's going to talk about that today, being down in Florida. We were all jealous, but he's back, so he's going to be giving the message today. But we've just got one quick announcement before we get going into his message today, and it's this. Starting this Thursday, that's January 19th, 2023 at 6:30 here at the church, we are going to be having Financial Peace University. Now, if you've been through this course before, you know what it is, but if you haven't, here's what it is. Have you ever wondered, okay, how do I have financial peace? Here in church, we talk a lot about peace in our personal lives, we talk about peace in our relational lives, we talk about peace with Christ, but how do I have financial peace? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about go through a 5-week course in which we learn how to handle our money, save money, and give our money biblically. So, if that sounds good to you and you want to have financial peace in your life, I highly encourage you to join this group. Again, 5 weeks starting January 19th. That's a Thursday at 6:30 here at the church. You need to text the word PEACE, P-E-A-C-E, to 518-223-8662 to register for that group. Again, that's the word PEACE to 518-223-8662. We hope to see you there. So, with that announcement out of the way, here's Pastor Paul.
I've developed a habit over the course of these last 30 years that many of my friends and colleagues find a little weird. And it is a little weird, I'll admit that, because I wasn't always this way. But what I now do that I didn't do before is when I drive a car, I drive in silence. That means no radio, no talk radio, no music, no Spotify, no podcast, no anything. Just the sound of the engine and the car being pushed through air, and then the rambling of my own thoughts. Basically what I do. Now, I know that's not normal because I wasn't always this way. This is not exactly the way I grew up. As a matter of fact, I was the guy that had to spend exorbitant amounts of money to have the best car stereo possible because I always had something on. And then something happened about 30 years ago that changed all of that. And what it was that changed all of that was children. That became a place where what I didn't realize was having 5 children, it's very loud all the time. So when I got in the car, it was the only place where there was silence. It became like my automobile sanctuary, and I just stayed there and began to not listen to anything in the car and had quiet. And I still do that to this day. It really is only maybe in the last 6 months do I get in the car and actually listen to something. But most of the time, I drive in complete silence. You might find that weird. Maybe you're going, no, I do the same thing. But for me, it is a huge change. And so here in these last couple of weeks, we traveled from New York to Florida and Florida back to New York. And that was about a 40 hours of driving time. And in that 40 hours of driving time, I have my wife next to me and she's reading and every once in a while saying to me, hey, do you want me to put something on? I'm like, no, I'm good. My daughter in the back seat with her headphones on, fading in and out of sleep over those 40 hours. And I'm driving and in silence, just me and my thoughts. And so as that happens, I just kind of think through, I think through the past, I think through the future, I think about where I'm going, I think forward, like what the day hold, what's the next week hold, what's my next 3 years look like, just kind of those types of thoughts roll through my mind. And then of course I think backwards, I think back maybe earlier in the day, earlier in the week when I was a kid, and I just kind of roll those thoughts through my mind. And it was in that particular moment driving through about Virginia, I thought back to the last message that I preached in the 4th week of Advent, on the message of love, talking about God's motives, and that God is always motivated by love, and then we look at our own motives, and sometimes they're blurry, we're not always sure what they are and how we are to be honest about them, and I kind of reapplied that to my life, kind of examining some of my own motives, and then something else hit me that I realized is even a little more difficult to answer in my own life, because sometimes it is hard for me to determine my motives. But then another thought rolled into my mind about something else that I wrestle with, trying to figure out what is best. And this internal wrestling match came out of the book of Philippians. And it's in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, that the Apostle Paul gave me something to wrestle with. And I want to share that with you here today. So Philippians chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness or compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. What I immediately notice in that portion of Scripture is the Apostle Paul has us looking outward. He has us thinking about other people. No selfish ambition, not humility. Consider others better than yourselves. Make sure you're humble, essentially, is what he's saying. And then looking out for the interests of others. And as I started thinking through those things, I'm like, okay, I've got that. Like selfish ambition. Got it. I know when I'm jockeying for position. Okay, I'm pretty honest with myself about that. Humility, well, I'm the best at being humble, so it can't possibly be that. I've got that mastered. That's a joke. Like, that, you'll get that later. But then I got to this interest part. So let's go back to verse 4 and take a closer look at that. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. That sounds simple enough, but it's not. Let me share with you why looking out for the best interests of others is difficult. Because I don't know what my interests are. I really don't. Just like I shared a few weeks back, your motives can be a little bit blurry. My interests are definitely blurry. And what I mean by that is this. When I say like the simple things that are my interests are pretty obvious. When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep. But when I expand it past that, that's where it gets a little blurry. And how could I possibly know what somebody else's interests are when I can't even determine what mine are? So I have to ask this question. If I'm going to figure out what my interests are, I have to ask, which me? Now, I know that might sound a little weird, or maybe I should phrase it this way. When me? You see, what I mean is this. What I was certain was my interests at 16 did not help me when I was 40. What I was certain my interests, my best interest at 7 doesn't even register as my best interest at 30. What I was convinced what was best for me at 29 is just regrettable for me at 40. And so here I stand at 52-year-old me. I have no idea what my best interest will be when I'm 77, or even if I will make 77. I have no idea, so I can't possibly know what my interests are. And this is where I get stuck, and I start thinking this way. So let me just make this real applicable for you. Think about it this way. You make financial decisions, or you have made financial decisions that were not in the best interest of future you. You made relationship decisions now that are not in the best interest of future you. You've made moral choices now that are not in the best interest of future you. You make health choices now that are not in the best interest of future you. And when I think about it that way, I have to come to this weird realization that I'm like a community of me's. I do make decisions that affect future me, and a lot of times they're bad decisions. So how in the world could I possibly know what's best for you when I don't even know what's best for me? I have to be able to answer that question first. What's best for the current me and the future me? That's a tough question to answer. The good news is this. Even if you're thoroughly confused right now, there is an answer, and the Apostle Paul gives it to us in Philippians chapter 2, verse 21. For everyone looks out for their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. Everyone looks out for their own interest. Yep, we've got that. We've established that. And that doesn't help the future you. We already have established all of that. Then Paul gives us this profound insight. And when he said there's another frame of reference for you to decide what is best for you right now. And that frame of reference isn't you. That frame of reference is Jesus Christ. That is the best choice to make, whatever is in his interest. Now, you could easily go, well, that just sounds like what would Jesus do? Should we just get the bracelet and start wearing that again? Partially. I mean, of course that works, but it's far deeper than that. Think about it this way. Looking out for the best interests of Jesus when you're 16 is still going to help you when you're older. If I was making best interests at 16 in the interest of Christ, I would not be suffering right up to this very day for some of the decisions I made when I was 16. If I made financial decisions in the interest of Christ in my 20s, I wouldn't have stuck 30-year-old me to fix it. If I made decisions about relationships in the best interest of Christ in my 30s, I'm going to reap the benefits of that in my 50s. You see how that works? Because I know this, my biggest regrets, the burden of weight, the weapon the enemy uses to bludgeon me are when I've made decisions for my best interest, my selfish best interest, and disregarding Christ completely. When I've not made decisions in the interest of Jesus, I pay for that later every time, and so do you. And the enemy uses those to bludgeon future you over and over again. Paul's direction for you and for me is to look out for the interests of Christ. You can't lose when you do that. You see, I've discovered this. Whenever I've made decisions in the best interests of Christ, I've never regretted them. And I said regretted. It doesn't mean that they're always easy or everything goes the way I want it to or the way I expect it to and everything doesn't come up sunshine, rainbows, and candy, but I've never regretted them. It could mean that their life is a little more difficult, but I still have never regretted them. I mean, I think about it this way. Jesus was betrayed and murdered, so I may face some difficult things in this life, but when I look out for the interests of Christ throughout my life, whichever me I'm talking about, whatever phase of life I may be in, I have the security and the confidence of knowing this, that I'm rooted in Christ. And why that matters so much? For several reasons. One, Jesus doesn't change. The writer of Hebrews tells us he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So when I'm making a decision rooted in the interest of Christ, I'm rooted in the one that doesn't change. It's important he doesn't change. So what matters to me at 11 is to Jesus when I'm 11 will still matter to Jesus when I'm 64. See, you can't go wrong there. So that's really helpful. He's also, it's not just the fact that he doesn't change, he's not stuck in time. He knows the beginning of my life and the end of my life. It's hard for me to think about 70-year-old me, but he's got that covered. He knows what's in his best interest as well, because Jesus sees the end and the beginning. And on top of that, he's also all-knowing. He knows what's best for me now, what's best for me in 5 years, and what's best for me in 6 months. And since I don't know the future me yet, then I must trust in the one that does and look out for his interests, because he has my best interest in mind. And once I start to get that down, then I can look at the people around me, because they're going to be very similar, because Jesus cares about them just as well. And don't forget one other important factor about Jesus' interest versus mine. He loves you. That's the key. I can trust in that. And if I know that he loves me, he's thinking far past just my time on this earth. He's actually considering your eternity when he's thinking about your best interests. And he tips his hand when he says things like this, that he's going there to prepare a place for you. Or when he tells us things like, hey, don't store up treasures here on earth, store them up in heaven. He's pointing us to something bigger. He's pointing us to eternity. So before I can look out for others' needs, we need to settle that we need to seek Jesus' interests now, here, today, because they don't change. And when we do, he's promised to provide for what we need when we seek him first. Makes sense. So if I seek Jesus' interests now in my life, that's the best for future me and eternal me. Now, one final thought. For our more lifetime experienced people, this one hit me about Walterboro, South Carolina. If I came to the end of my life and started to think this way, like Jesus' best interest, I could easily throw my hands up in the air and think, oh, what's the point now? I'm at the end. I've made a mess of most of it. I'm on the tail end of life. What does it really matter? Well, I want to tell you this. It's never too late to start making Jesus' interests yours. You can't go wrong. Because he's not just looking for your time here on earth. James tells us we're just a vapor or a mist here. We're here today, gone tomorrow. He's thinking far bigger than that. So when you're choosing Jesus' best interest, when you're looking out for his, you're talking about your eternity as well. Jesus' primary interest in your life is your salvation. It's your soul. That's why he lived, died, and rose again. For salvation. So, once you have that settled in your life, once you say, okay, I am going to today choose to live for Jesus' interests, whatever they may be, whether it's relational, emotional, physical, financial, whatever it is, I'm going to choose that. Then I have confidence that the future me is going to be grateful that I did. So, where do you need to make Jesus' interests yours? Is it financial? Is it relational? Whatever it may be. Change that today. Or maybe today it's just about choosing Jesus and trusting your eternity into his hands and discovering his salvation for you. Because once you look out for Jesus' interests in your life, that's a blessing for the current you and the future you. In addition to that, once you have that established, and guess what? Looking out for the interests of others becomes really easy because you understand this. One thing that Jesus is always concerned about is their soul. And so it helps me to understand I just need to reach out and love first and foremost to the world around me. Then I can effectively look out for the interests of those that I am close to and those that I rub elbows with every day. So, will you look for Jesus' interests in your life today?